Hey everyone, and welcome. So for our lesson tonight, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful and, honestly, most misunderstood moments in all of church history, the final hours of Joseph and Hyrum Smith. We're going to talk about how their testimony was sealed. Okay, let's just jump right into it. I mean, we've all heard the story of Carthage Jail our whole lives, right? But what if I told you there's a whole other layer to it? When you start to peel back the curtain, you find these really human, really complex, and kind of surprising details that, for me, make their sacrifice even more meaningful. So first, let's set the scene. Joseph, Hyrum, John Taylor, and Willard Richards are together in the jailer's bedroom on the second floor. And it's important to get this picture right. This wasn't some dark, scary dungeon with chains on the wall. It was a bedroom. But what happened in that room in those final hours, well, it might just change the simple picture you've always had in your mind. Okay, so the first thing that sometimes throws people is this. They drink some wine. John Taylor himself wrote that they sent for it to, in his words, lift their spirits. Now, it's super important to remember that back then, the word of wisdom was understood differently. It was good advice, but it wasn't the strict commandment tied to temple worthiness that it is for us today. So this wasn't a sacrament or anything like that. It was just them in a terribly stressful moment trying to find a little comfort. Here's another detail you might not know. Joseph, Hyrum, and John Taylor had actually taken off their temple garments. And Joseph's reasoning was that he didn't want something so sacred to be exposed to the sneers and jeers of his enemies if he was killed. It was an act of protection for something holy. Interestingly, Willard Richards made a different choice. He decided to keep his on. Right before everything went down, John Taylor sang A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. Now, when we sing that hymn in church, it's slow, it's somber, it's really reflective, right? Well, hang on, because that is not at all how they would have heard it. The original tune it was set to was called Duane Street, and it was fast and cheery. It sounded almost like an Irish jig. It was meant to be hopeful and uplifting. The slow, sad version we all know today was arranged later on, and its mood was completely changed by the tragedy that was about to happen. All right, now let's talk about the attack itself. And this is where we have to tackle a really big question people sometimes have. Was this a martyrdom or was it a gunfight? And the answer to that becomes crystal clear when you just look at the order of events. The timing here is absolutely everything. The mob attacks first. They shoot through the door and Hyrum is killed before Joseph has fired a single shot. It's only after watching his brother get murdered right in front of him that Joseph fires back. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to defend the others in the room. So yeah, a friend had managed to smuggle a small pistol to Joseph. After Hyrum was shot, Joseph used it. He managed to wound 3 of the attackers, and that caused the mob to hesitate. They stayed back in the doorway instead of just rushing in to kill everyone. That single act of defense is what most people credit with saving the lives of John Taylor and Willard Richards. So this brings up a really important question, right? Does fighting back, does defending yourself mean you can't be a martyr? Well, to get the answer, we have to look at what that word, martyr, actually means. The original Greek word is martus, and it's so simple. It just means witness. A martyr is someone who is killed for the testimony they bear. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not they resisted an angry mob. Joseph died for his witness of Jesus Christ in the Restoration, period. As he fell from the window, Joseph cried out his last words, "O Lord my God." Now, many people who were close to him, including John Taylor, who was right there, believed this was actually the beginning of a very specific phrase. They believed it was the Masonic grand hailing sign of distress, which is a cry for help. And here's the kicker. Many of the men in that mob were Masons themselves. They were bound by a sacred oath to help a brother in that situation. The fact that they heard it, recognized it, and kept firing anyway, well, that just shows you the depth of the betrayal and hatred in their hearts. Okay, so in the middle of all this absolute horror, this unbelievable story of survival and, frankly, a miracle starts to unfold. John Taylor was hit, and hit badly, but he lived to become the most important witness to what happened that day. He was shot not once, not twice, but 4 times. One of those bullets got stuck in his knee, and he carried it with him for the rest of his life. Can you imagine? So he was trying to get out the same window Joseph did when he was shot in the thigh. And he describes this feeling of falling out of the window. But then all of a sudden, he was thrown back into the room by some force he couldn't explain. It wasn't until later that he figured it out. Another bullet had slammed into the pocket watch in his vest. The watch was shattered, but the force of the impact was so strong that it literally knocked him backward, back into the safety of the room and away from the mob waiting on the ground. And here's the coolest part. Modern forensic experts have actually studied this, and they say that a ricocheting bullet could create exactly that kind of forceful impact he described. So we have modern science basically backing up this incredible, miraculous story. So John Taylor survives, and because he survived, he became the primary witness who would make sure the world never forgot the truth of what happened in Carthage. I mean, just picture this. While he is still laid up recovering from 4 bullet wounds, John Taylor writes the powerful official announcement of the martyrdom. Those very words are what we now read as scripture in Doctrine and Covenants, section 135. But you know, he didn't write down the whole detailed story right away. It took 12 more years. That's when Wilford Woodruff came to him and basically said, "John, you have to do this. You're the only person on earth who can tell this story the way it needs to be told." And for the next 43 years, John Taylor was a living witness. Think about that. For an entire generation of saints, he was the guy. He was the direct link to the prophet Joseph, the man who could look them in the eye and say, "I was there. I saw it all." So what's the big takeaway here? Knowing these messy human details, the wine, the pistol, the fear, the miracles, it doesn't make the story less sacred. If anything, it makes it more real. It shows these were real men in an impossible situation who stood for their witness until the very end. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. How does knowing this fuller, more complex story change what the martyrdom means to you?